Well, thanks for everyone for attending this evening. This is the second of 4 nights of the Nuffield Australia 2019 Scholar presentations. If you missed last week, we had Kerry Ann Lamb speaking on the potato industry, Tom Green speaking about eggs, we had Claire Peltzer looking at how to attract youth into ag, and Andrew Sargent that was looking at open source data in agriculture. That webinar is posted on the Nuffield Australia YouTube site, and tonight's webinar will also be posted. So go to YouTube and simply search Nuffield Australia and you'll be able to find these presentations. Tonight we have 2 beef-focused presentations, Beck Burnham and Tom Green, and then we have 2 presentations from different industries, but Johanna Tomlinson. Wow, the rain's getting heavy.
Rain, I say. So Jody must have frozen there. But thank you, Jody, for the introduction. And welcome to our presentation. Pictured at Begalgapal, where I grew up, riding along behind the next generation of heifers, and hopefully they're better than the last, as pictured, is a time when you're able to question your current practices, bounce off the family and question industry status quo, and maybe even consider something really big like applying for a Nuffield scholarship. This is where my amazing Nuffield experience all began. Of the Australian beef herd, 64% is located in Northern Australia, which includes Queensland, Northern Territory and the top part of WA. Holmes and McLean stated 2 barriers to profit in the Australian beef industry as operating scale and operating efficiencies, which is much more in our control. To improve operating efficiencies, they stated that you could look at 1, improving grazing land management, 2, improve herd management, and 3, improve genetics. Only 15% of sale bulls offered in Northern Australia are accompanied with an estimate of genetic potential, compared to a whopping 70% in Southern Australia. So my report looked into how we could optimise that last point of genetic selection in Northern Australia. Boogal Cattle is the family seed stock operation in which I grew up, selling privately 100 bulls annually, grass-bred, measured, genotyped, genetically evaluated on breed plan, and predominantly Brahman and Charbray. I also run my own seed stock operation, REB Grazing, adjusting paddocks in Queensland, measuring progeny for my red Brahman female herd. So with land, herd and grazing management type, as previously mentioned, my curiosity focused in around improving our genetic selection. My why for applying for a Nuffield scholarship. How were we to introduce bulls to a herd that were of similar genetic value, but hopefully better? I wanted to capitalise on Dad's 50 years of hard work of tight herd management. How could I guarantee this, especially for the traits that I could not see? Because I felt that these traits you can't see are the most profit-driving traits, and they're hard to measure and they're non-visual. Fertility can be 70% of profit in a beef enterprise, and it can be up to 5 years by the time you know whether or not they're going to be the type of female that will remain in the herd. So I set off on my Nuffield journey. I made the most of the travelling opportunity, going to 14 countries. However, I really did start in Australia. I wanted to get the full picture at home first. I was off on my first Nuffield research road trip to Agbu and Armidale via my sponsors at Yugelbar. It was 2,000 kilometres. It was a good warm-up for my USA Midwest trip that I did 5,600 kilometres by myself with. So the scientists Johnson, Walmsley and Walcott were very generous with their time, teaching me the scientific basics. Phenotype equals genotype plus environment. Now, most may have heard of this, but I hadn't. So just to demystify some of the scientific words I do use in my report, I apologise. The phenotype is purely the animal or its performance. Genotype, as Ben Hayes referred to as like a sack of DNA. That's how he looks at an animal when he analyses it. But what we all tend to see is what the environment does to that DNA, or nutrition, 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 as my brother and I say. But we really want to see genotypes or DNA that can handle our dry environments in the north. So genetic evaluations take measurement and predict the genetic component of an animal, separate from the environment, So a good example of this in Australia is breed plan. I saw all species producing protein, accelerating their genetic gain using this type of genetic evaluation. The purchase and introduction of genetic superior bulls is one of the quickest ways to achieve genetic gain in your herd. The genetics remain there for 10 years, so an informed decision on predictable genetics just made sense. However, we need to be really clear on what it is we want. A clear written long-term breeding objective was discussed with Berry at Chiswick in Ireland, and he suggested that this would be an appropriate breeding vision for a beef farmer in 2019, producing beef at a profit in a humane, socially and environmentally proactive manner. Throughout the world, with all my interviews and places I visited, there was some really common elements: clearly defined breeding objectives, excellent herd and grazing management, ongoing phenotypic measurement, genotyping, genetic evaluation, but more importantly, the use of all of the selection tools. These all help to contribute to breed the beef animal of the future, is what I called it as I went travelling. Before Australians' genetic evaluation and breed plan was introduced in the 1980s, we did rely on our eyes alone, and we did do a very good job as genetic gain has been experienced. Structural correctness, temperament and breed type were things that we could easily improve upon. However, we have so many more tools from which to select now, and in Northern Australia we have genotyping to thank for this, as it's provided estimates of genetic potential to animals that had no prior measurement, all due to a very good reference population that's been fueled by a group of dedicated seed stock producers that measure phenotype on tropically adapted cattle, and of course our research projects and scientists that collect station data. Uptake in the north has been encouraging, with Burnham breeders now hitting 20,000 samples of DNA compared to nearly none 5 years ago. That's quite comparable to Angus in the south with 25,000 samples. What I learned is that the toolkit to optimize genetic selection is large. In the black are the things that we do have available at the moment in Northern Australia, and in the orange I feel that Tropical Breed Technical Services is a free consultancy that is very underutilised. In the red are my recommendations and some of the things that are still under development in Australia. The desirable apps exciting, making EBVs easy to understand, especially selection indexes. Multi-breed genetic evaluations are being enabled through research projects. An objective indicator of for eating quality is something that I really think we continue to work upon, because we all know that our humpy Brahmins do eat well. And all of these measurements, especially the huge amount of 3.5 million data set of MSA data to be collected to use for on-farm selection tools. However, an interview with Dr. Alison Van Innerham at UC Davis in California talked about the future that gene editing may hold. It's just the cherry on top of the breeding sundae, she referred to it, but how amazing to be able to have sire surrogacy and those genetic dehorners. Global examples of environmentally adapted meat production were fascinating. They weren't just surviving, but thriving. Predation, theft, extreme cold, heat, and farming in harmony with big game. And I mean 5,000 zebra pressure and water facilities. That's a lot to share with the big game. So it made me realise that Northern Australia was not the only harsh environment in which to breed cattle in the world. And just to note, the jaguar had been captured for research. He's still alive. So what I learned is that I saw lots of modern technology, both at home and globally, to help measure phenotype, which really shines a light in the north, because I know how difficult it is to capture the simple things like date of birth. This is a birth alert system that sends an SMS to your phone after being expelled when a calf is born. I saw this in both Florida and Rockhampton. Also in Rockhampton, I didn't see walkover weighing anywhere else in the world. It not only captures date of birth, but also calf weight, which is a bit easier than us trying to catch calves in large 5,000 acre paddocks. Collars and tags are things that did help to measure animal location and behaviour and health. And I really do think that they may be a good one to help us identify some fertility traits in ovulation. Grow safe units measuring feed efficiency, greenhouse gas emissions being measured in Ireland, objective measurements in a meatworks in the States, And then I also saw in pigs some video recognition and facial recognition technology being trialled. So all of these modern technology tools are fantastic, but the cost benefit and workability, and also the release and development stage that they're at, because a lot of it is new technology, and a standard livestock language will be some factors to consider with future adoption. So I saved the best to last. Scrotal measurement. It's a simple thing to measure. It can be done at 400 days and has a great correlation for age of puberty. So in our tropically adapted cattle, and much better measurement than pre-sale at 24 or 36 months. It's simple and cheap and could be implemented this year, and even better if those measurements are sent off for genetic evaluation. So this was great. Modern tech, lots of data being collected, but it's useless unless it's turned into knowledge. So the data needs to be made into tools, and this is where it gets sent to a genetic evaluation. I did learn that a selection index was the best way to have a balanced selection for profit. Estimated breeding values underpinned that, but what underpinned the accuracy of that was the combination of not just one, it was the three parts of information: phenotype or the animal measurement, the DNA or genotype measurement, and the pedigree. So these were all very important things to produce the best details. So with reproductive technologies being well adapted in the north, it's worth noting that Gardner Ranch in Kansas, USA experienced no gain whatsoever on just visual selection and exclusive AI from 1964 through to 1980, until they decided to implement a genetic evaluation in the 80s. It was similar to breed plan. The genetic success is measured by the standing eating quality standards. In 2019, they'd processed 6,558 head, and out of those, 98% had graded choice or higher. So that's a fairly impressive genetic gain. If we move on to Brazil, the Special Certificate of Identification and Production was a really good way to cut through the confusion that some people experience, including myself, when we look at genetic evaluation. They were branded on the near side shoulder with the brand in the red circle you can see, and that helped to say that that animal was actually in the top 20% of its cohort. Even more interestingly, only the top 1% of bulls within the SAPE program were able to be used for AI. So I thought that the incentivisation offered by government, as such as reduced taxes sold in this scheme, was a really helpful thing for seed stock producers to adapt genetic technology. This was an industry level model recommendation that I saw in Ireland. It's been in operation since 1998 and makes total sense. ICBF, or the Irish Cattle Breeders Association, deal with both dairy and beef and have literally married every single data point collection into one hub. It's just fantastic. How did they do it? Through incentivisation. CEO Andrew Cromie said, the data is expensive, Beck, so let's just pay the farmer, it's cheaper. So I really did think that that was a great model and something that I could see maybe MSA being fed into a big data hub. I learned that there's no silver bullets. However, what genotyping has done for the North cannot be underestimated. We see far more polygenetics at sales addressing welfare improvement in the last decade. It really has people thinking about the genetic potential of their stock. And 50% accuracy is better than 0% accuracy when we're looking at purchasing bulls and knowing the genetic potential. So we can use all of the tools at our disposal for more profitable and market suitable beef. We do want to be able to have Australia being trusted for its quality. Thank yous to our diverse Nuffield Global Focus Program group, to whom I spent 6 weeks travelling the globe with. Their cross-industry questions were just invaluable. To my family and friends that made room in their herds to assist my breeders and manage them whilst I was absent in my year of Nuffield travel was something I will never forget, especially as it was a tough drought year. Also, to condense 2 years of learning into a 10,000 word report into 9 minutes is pretty challenging. So if this has interested you, I really do invite you to look at my report, and I'm more than willing to either chat or email if you have any questions. It really is my intention to share my findings because I feel that we have so much potential in the North. My takeaway, and hopefully yours, is that the success of animals on northern pasture may not always be what you see. The genetic potential of an animal in profit-driving traits is most often non-visual. Just combine the old tools with the new tools for the best, most predictable breeding outcome. Thank you, and back to you, Jodie.
Thank you very much, Beck. Yes, I am back. So I apologise for freezing earlier, but it stopped raining here, so we should be right. Now I'd like to introduce Tom Green, who will be able to share his screen and start his presentation. Thanks, Thomas.
There we go. Thanks, Jodie. I'm not sure if you have me there, but before I start, I'd just like to just introduce myself. My name's Tom Green, so I'm the General Manager of Southern Cross Farms. So it's a commercial feedlot and farming business in Tintinara, South Australia. Now, before I start, I'd just like to thank my sponsor. While travelling and since travelling, their presence, Rabobank in the agriculture sector is just something to be applauded, and their support for Nuffield, again, is recognised. I'd also like to thank the Thomas family and Thomas Foods for allowing me to go through this experience and scholarship, and my colleagues at the feedlot who kept things running seamlessly in my absence. And particularly my friends and family and my wife Justine. Again, without their support, it just can't happen. The topic, animal welfare, it's close to home. Being a feedlot manager, I think I was over the last few years, the topical nature of it and the emotion in the conversation surrounding it really brought me to the topic, which has been a challenging one. Just a quick recap of my 2019. So busy one with a young family, but luckily enough, I was able to travel 17 weeks overseas, which in this current environment, something was a real privilege. So with my travel, I tried to explore a vast variety of visits, not only feedlots. So I tried to explore the whole supply chain, and not only in beef. I looked at everything from vegetable growing, chickens, piggeries, dairies, and what that did, it gave me a real breadth of knowledge and a true understanding of what it meant to be in agriculture and in the food service sector. Now, what is animal welfare? And I think the key point here is it's slightly different to everyone, and it's actually it's a really tough to define, but the World Organization for Animal Health defines it with how an animal is coping within its surrounds where it lives. So that not only means its physical state, but also its mental state. It needs to have a positive mental state, and we need to try and minimize negative experiences, and that's a really important thing to remember. It's not only positive, but the negatives. Why so challenging? This topic, it would have been easier in hindsight to choose an operational or production topic, but for me, even 18 months later of study and learning, I'm still being challenged by new ideas and new thoughts. And I've put these three photos up on this slide to get you guys to have the audience to have a look at these. And I think subconsciously you've probably already formed an opinion on the animals in these photos and their state of welfare. And I think it's important to remember it's actually a really poor indication of animal welfare just looking at these animals. You can't just simply ask an animal how it feels. So it's important to remember it's still subjective. Science is catching up, but not just yet. So I'm just going to go through what I learned in my travels and since my travels, and I've broken that out into a producer, supply chain, and consumers. And what I'm trying to do here is mainly compare advanced nations such as Australia and emerging nations. And I'm only just going to scratch the surface. It's such an enormous topic, but in general, producers or food producers, their animal welfare standards I've found are governed by 5 main points, and that's government legislation, socioeconomics, culture, religion, and demographics. Now, I found all all people that raise animals do have the right intentions, and they work the best with what tools they have. But it just so happens we all have different tools, and I think we need to understand that not everyone, when we're not all on the same government legislation, or have the same wealth or religion. Now on the supply chain, you see some really contrasting photos here, and again, I think looking at them, you have instantly a preconceived idea. And what I found is scale is a really poor indicator of animal welfare status. I found good and poor animal welfare outcomes from both large and small producers. Here with the supply chain, countries or nations such, and what that means is each link in that supply chain is taking their cut. And that's understandable. That's the business in the world we live in. But what that's done is it's essentially pushed producers and consumers further apart to the point now where they're strangers in advanced nations. And in stark contrast, emerging nations, and I've put one example in there, and that's limited cold chain technology, and probably the inefficiency of small scale production. It means more of the population works in the food production sector, thus bringing producer and consumer close together. Now, my global observations of consumers, my main point and what I want to talk to here is the level of privilege. Now, when I say that, for myself and most people living in Australia, we can go to the supermarket year round and select any fruit or vegetable we want 12 months a year. The meat shelf is full. That's a privilege, and it's not actually representative of the majority of people globally. Another example would be non-cultural or non-religious veganism. And I'm really supportive of individual choice. I think that's fantastic, but it's really important to respect and understand that is a truly unique privilege. If you can source your micronutrients and protein year round without requiring animal products at all, it's truly unique and a lucky thing, but not the majority. The common themes I saw throughout, there is a rapidly growing interest in how food is produced, and again, a rapidly increasing expectations on food producers. And if you're in the food producing business or in that supply chain, we need to understand that. My final slide here are just some key findings. Again, we're just scratching the surface, trying to fit 18 months of thought and study into just a few minutes is really tough. And the top one here, shared values, well, that's nearly a topic on its own. And what that's saying is, I think before we can share values, I think as either a producer or again, any supply chain or consumer, we need to have our own values. And hopefully they're just not financially driven, but also we've got some ecological and societal goals and values in there. Once we have our own, I think it's important to respect and find out through the supply chain or what our consumers expect or their values. Once we have values, we can start to build the trust. Particularly here in Australia, my next point is improving supply chain collaboration. And I understand that's easier said than done. Australia produces such a wide variety of produce, big and small producer. But I think at times we can get caught up with trying to outdo the neighbour. And instead, we need to be really being one voice and speaking to our consumers. Educate yourself is my third point. So that means don't stop at the farm gate. Follow your produce through the supply chain and to the consumer. And by doing that, again, I think you're going to understand values and build that level of respect and understanding. I think it will help you both financially and general sustainability of your business. And my final point is have a voice, because it is a rapidly changing world. And if you're not there at the table having a say, these decisions are going to be made without you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. So now we'll move on to our third presentation. Richard Leask is a wine producer from South Australia. So Richard, I'll ask you to share your screen, please.
How are we going there, Jodie? Is that the right screen?
No, we just want that to be just your slideshow view because we can see your next slide. So.
Yeah. Where's that bit gone? Of course, with all the trials we had. I can't get that to swap over, Jade.
Try display settings.
Hang on, let's try this one. Oh, here we go. No.
There we go.
That better?
Yes, that's great. Well done.
Right. Thank you, Jodie. Evening, everyone. Sorry about that. Yes, I'm here to talk about my Nuffield Scholarship, with sustainability being something of a bit of a catch cry in all forms of ag. I was looking at what systems we perhaps could implement into the wine industry in future, and stumbled along regenerative agriculture, and just to see whether it had any value as a system in our system going forward. Firstly, I'd just like to thank Nuffield Australia, of course, and my sponsor, Wine Australia. Without them, obviously, someone like me wouldn't get the opportunity to do this fantastic experience and get to travel, the globe to 10 countries around the world. And I thank them very much. I'd also like to thank my Japan GFP group, fantastic bunch of people. We had 6 countries represented in our 10 group of 10, and made some friends for life. And thirdly, I'd like to thank my family, my wife Sharon, and my 3 children, Emma, Matthew, and Patrick, who allowed me just to swan in and out of 2019 as I pleased. I'll be forever grateful. Just quickly, my brother and I run a couple of little businesses in McLaren Vale. Leask Agri is our vineyard contracting business and vineyard management, looking after, including our own properties, about 250 hectares of wine grapes. And then we've got a little wine brand with Celador and Willunga called Hither and Yon, which take probably 70% of the fruit from one of our own vineyards. So what did I study? In the end, I was looking at system change, but stumbled into regenerative agriculture and really wanted to understand what it is, what were the key components, and obviously if it had any value, but really importantly, what we could learn from other production systems that we could then place into our wine production and grape growing systems. So it's with that focus that I'll show you a few examples. Firstly, what is our issue? Probably no different to anyone else in the farming sector. We're all striving for resilience in our business, obviously longevity, but also resilience in our farming systems and our land management. And they're all coming under pressures from, environmental pressures, obviously extreme weather events. For us, it's rainfall. It's becoming a bit erratic, and obviously, hot, dry summers. There's economic pressures where we've got increased costs. By and large, prices are static, and we've got increased compliance from buyers and consumers. And of course, there's the human and social element of the whole system. The care for our staff, the chemicals that they've got to handle, and how we deal with living in a peri-urban environment, where vineyards quite often are backed right up against large, human activity. So with that in mind, what did I find out? Well, it's no surprise that, this system is complex. It is very big. There is a lot of moving parts in it. Not all of it's well understood, and it's still being trialled and tested at farm scale around the world. It's hard to measure. How do we measure success when we're looking at system change and asking nature to do a lot of the stuff that we've done with inputs ourselves? So really, I sort of drilled down to essentially looking at the carbon cycle in the soil and the microbial health of the soil as places for us to perhaps see whether we've made a difference, good or bad. anyone that's sort of involved in regenerative ag will know that there's sort of these 5 key practices. All of those there are well known. I've added the 6th, which is the balanced soil nutrition element. It came up time and again when I was overseas at conferences or talking to producers. So I decided that really it should be in this mix, given that we're all running production systems. All of this stuff looks really straightforward and a whole heap of common sense, and really it is. But like most things, when you're driving around the world, quite often common sense isn't that common. And I saw a lot of this all over the place, and that's not to necessarily pick on Central Valley, but this is the sort of stuff that happens around the globe. So if we go through the first principle, I'm going to give you some very visual examples here. On the left-hand side, if we want to maximise soil coverage. You know, for vineyards, it's important to keep temperature down. Obviously, for us, we want to enhance the amount of water infiltration into the ground because we're limited in most regions with irrigation water. So at Terra Sancta, they used a diverse cover crop that they direct drilled and left to go to seed, and then created a really thick, strong mulch that then they were seeding summer cover crops into as well, to have plants growing all year round. On the right-hand side at Peter Barrett's Lindburn Station, I saw great examples of high biomass cover crops used to roll and then plant forage crops into for his cattle. And I wondered whether something like this may well be of use to the wine industry when we're establishing new vineyards as weed mats, rather than having to use harsh herbicides. We need to minimise cultivation. We understand that it does damage to soil structure and soil biology, and it's around the world. So examples here from the US and McLaren Vale. No-till needs to be something the wine industry needs to look at closely for establishing pasture in mid-rows, but also we need to be very careful when we go away from herbicides, as the industry is starting to do, that we don't create one more bad habit, which is a heavy reliance on under-vine cultivation. We're going to need to find some solutions there, otherwise we're just going to end up damaging soil to the point of runoff. Plant diversity is a key to the regenerative ag systems. Here we've got 2 really good examples, and I think where the wine industry's got a lot of upside. We've got a lot of land that sits in the middle of the vine rows. We should be using a diverse mix of plant species to give us some ecosystem services. On the left, the Napa, this was absolutely humming, this vineyard with beneficial insects, and obviously, diversity above the ground gives us diversity below the ground, and that's what we're trying to do, invite microbial activity into the system to then give us some payback. Terra Sancta again, I think came up with a really good solution here, and something we need to look further at in Australia is companion planting under vines that then die out during the dry summer months. They're only running at 300 to 350 mil rainfall, so quite dry and very winter dominant. And I think this is a great example of what we can do if we get the plant species right. We can do away with a lot of the harsh herbicides and harsh cultivation under vine. Active root systems all year round are important if we're going to be building the carbon cycle. We need to have photosynthesizing plants. That's what draws carbon into the system. It provides nutrient and food for the microorganisms, which then supply the plant with nutrients for growth. The 2 photos on the left, I think, is really what we should be looking at in terms of mid-rows in vineyards, diverse pasture mixes with lots of species growing a lot of biomass that we can then use to roll or mow and utilise that. Or, a non-productive areas where we could be using, biodiversity corridors like we saw in the research centre in France, where, we can invite insectary plantings into our system without affecting our production models. So another thing to look at these areas with a productive mindset. Animal integration is obviously a very strong part of this system and the one that people stumble over the most. Having livestock in the system is important, but nowhere near as important as about how we manage them. I think by and large we do a fairly poor job in Australia with set stocking the norm. I saw some great examples in the US with high rotation cell grazing, big numbers, manure concentration, then providing, you know, a useful resource for the vines. And, you know, it with well managed and good infrastructure, it actually becomes not a chore. So there's 300 sheep in this 1 hectare paddock in Fabulous Creek, and they were moving them daily. It need not be that intensive. Up the road, I saw, you know, a single hot wire with cattle being moved in almonds, trampling grass, creating, you know, habitat, and generally just doing a fantastic job. You know, again, the nutrition bit is key. We're running production systems. We're taking nutrient out, so we need to put nutrient back. And if we've got the plants photosynthesizing at their maximum, and the opportunity for biology to then start to do some of the heavy lifting is relevant. But we've got to work on major constraints, and if we don't get that right, then we've got no hope of getting these systems to get into balance. Clearly, one size does not fit all. Everyone's property is different. You know, these principles, what I like about them is that you can apply them across your business, but you're going to need to design the system yourself. And I saw it across many different industries where they had taken these things and got them to work. It allows a bit of freedom, a bit of creativity, but you've got to fit them to your environment. You know, these people, you know, it's a handful of the people I visited around the world. They're creative, resourceful, observant, determined, committed, and very inventive farmers. And they're challenging the norm and rethinking about the way they do their systems. And through that commitment and thought, you know, comes innovation. And this is a vineyard I saw in Placenus, Kelly Mulville's vineyard. He'd started it from scratch. He's got a 1.8 metre high cordon with a 1.6 metre high drip line, and he's able to run his livestock in there all year round, limiting tractor passes, reducing costs, and also adding a really important income source to the system by having livestock that you can then sell and add on. Maybe we need to rethink how things look rather than fitting into the systems we've currently got. So finally, you know, summing it up, we've got a lot of stuff to investigate. It's a very busy, complex system with, you know, limited industry research at farm level. A lot of it's anecdotal. A lot of it needs to be, you know, road tested. Industry, researchers, producers all need to get together to start modelling this stuff so we can answer some of the questions that we've got up there. And it's going to be ongoing because it just doesn't stop. It's a very dynamic system, but I think there's some really good take-homes for the wine industry and some real benefit. Thanks very much. Back to you, Julie.
Thanks very much, Richard. Just a reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box and we will answer all the questions from our 4 speakers after we hear from our last speaker, Johanna Tomlinson. You can actually raise your hand and ask a question but verbally, so that is also an option. So if you have a question that's a little bit complicated to type, please save that up and you can raise your hand. So now I'd like to hand over to our last speaker, Johanna Tomlinson from WA.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Johanna Tomlinson. Thanks for that warm welcome and well done to my colleagues on their wonderful presentations. Tonight I'm presenting on growing soil health, the future drivers and critical knowledge growth strategies I see, with a focus on soil acidification. Oh dear. Sorry, we're having some issues. Okay, so first of all, thanks to my sponsor, CBH Group, West Australian Cooperative. Thanks for the support from Nuffield Australia and not only the travelling, but all the support in our learnings. My family, especially my husband Wayne, my friends and everyone who's been involved in my research. Here's the wonderful 2019 China Global Focus Program. We had a great time in China. Again, it's one of those opportunities that many people won't have at the moment. So about me and our farm, we're located on the south coast of Western Australia. Between Bremer Bay and Albany, we have about 4,000 hectares. I met my farmer in 1996. I had a background in the mining industry, studied environmental science, but I met my farmer and my whole world changed. We've got 3 young children. They're all very tolerant of mum travelling in 2019. Hopefully we've got a new future farmer in that group there. So as I said, south coast of WA, we are beef, sheep and cattle for breeders. We're also grain and forage producers. Ooh, sorry, my screens aren't marrying up very well. Apologies for that, everyone. So 3rd generation farm, we're dry land, obviously non-irrigated, and we have a number of soil health issues here on the south coast and throughout Western Australia. Dear. I'm just going to pause for a minute, Jodie. There's lots of technical issues here.
No problem, Johanna. Take your time.
Thank you. All right. There we go. Beautiful south coast summer evening picture. All right, back on track, everyone. So what's the issue? Well, the issue for us, one of our major soil constraints is soil acidification, and that's not an unfamiliar issue across all of Western Australia. This particular property here we purchased about 5 years ago. We were involved in a program that mapped a range of soil health indicators, including soil acidification. And as you've probably already worked out, we've got quite a bit of work to do in addressing those. So we started implementing a liming program, obviously, but I wanted to know more. So WA soils are challenging. It's fairly widely and globally known that they are some of the world's poorest soils. And obviously I did see quite a few other poor soils throughout my global travels. In the top soil, 0 to 10 centimetres across this West Australian grain growing region, you can see there from the indicators, we've got quite a lot of our landscape impacted by soil acidification. Other soil health issues in Western Australia are salinity, waterlogging, non-wetting. There's a range of soil health issues. The best practice to remedy those soil health issues, including soil acidification, are generally fairly well known, especially in the case of soil acidification. It's put some lime on. There's other alternatives that people play with as well. But we're finding, and certainly the indications from the Department of Primary Industries, is that it's not being widely adopted. That best practice is not being widely adopted. And so that has production and also natural resource management impacts for all of our growing region. I also found there's plenty of research around, well, what are the barriers to best practice adoption? So I didn't really want to focus on the science of soil acidification. I didn't want to focus on the barriers. What I wanted to look at was, well, what's going to drive soil health improvement in Western Australia? And I also wanted to have a look at, well, what are the essential knowledge and growth strategies that we need to be able to support that? So what did I find out? Well, here I am at the USDA Research Centre. These wonderful scientists opened up on a Sunday for us to have a look at. Lots of soil acidification issues in South Carolina as well. Soil health is increasingly recognised as an international, national and state priority. We've got some soil strategies coming out of the Commonwealth Government as well as the West Australian Government in the next few months, which is very wonderful to see. Some really high level priority and strategy. Soil health issues are obviously a global issue. Looking at soil acidification in particular, globally the current best practice is lime. There's no silver bullets, as Beck said, for lots of our challenging production and NRM issues. The issues of freight costs and access to lime that we have here in Western Australia are experienced in other parts of the world. The sources of lime varied in places, and one was really interesting for me was when we were in Germany, and this particular grower who hosted us for a number of days, he actually was sourcing his lime cake out of the cooling towers as a byproduct of nuclear power production. So it was interesting. So here we are in China. Shout out there for our people online from China. Globally and increasingly, interest is being shown by society, consumers, markets, industry and government around environmental stewardship, and we consider soil health is obviously a part of this. So I wanted to look at those drivers and the opportunities for growers to improve their soil health management, including that soil acidification. So consumers with their buying power, opportunities around branding, obviously for growers and throughout the value chain as well. Red Tractor was an example of a certified standard which included environmental and soil health management standards. Regulation was another key driver. For example, in the Canterbury Plains in particular, they've been quite heavily impacted by water quality regulation. And I guess the important thing there to notice, they started with best practice and tried to drive that as an industry, but ultimately it was determined that regulation had to come in. Value chain stakeholders, value chain stakeholders. So I just wanted to share this wonderful Rabobank image here, because obviously value chains or supply chains are very long, very integrated. This one here is basically showing how data might move between different value chain operators. But it got me thinking, if there's pressures on all of these different value or supply chain operators around soil stewardship or environmental stewardship more broadly, how will that come down and then impact on us as growers? So for example, not pictured here though, but banking institutions, there's a lot of pressure from them, or on them rather, to approve their environmental credentials. So how will that impact on their clients? Will it move from just financial performance metrics to assessing our sustainability? And there's talk about that. We also have current programs in place, such as canola and barley growers in Western Australia declare, and many growers worldwide declare through the International Sustainability and Carbon Certification Scheme, how they are addressing environmental sustainability on farm. A few different metrics around that. So market access is another key driver for us on our soil health drive. Opportunities in markets. In the future, well, it's developing in Australia, as we know, but what about carbon markets? What are the opportunities there for growers around soil health? Ecosystem services markets. These are things that are developing and something to keep an eye on. So the knowledge growth strategy part, I guess I went in there with the knowledge that WA growers indicate soil health as a priority, and soil acidification and its management is a really big ongoing concern in Western Australia, despite previous research and investment. So soils are complex. There's lots of characteristics Richard talked about earlier. They are very complex, and it's a big job trying to understand them and then manage them from a landholder point of view. We've got the physical and the chemical pretty well known, but I think we've got a lot more work to do when it comes to the biological characteristics, so more research there, and then the interactions on soil health more generally. Farming systems focus. That's really important because at the end of the day, the farmers are managing the landscape and the soils in a farming system. So research to support that is vital. We need to acknowledge that our farmers like to learn by peer-to-peer and by having a local focus and an ability to go out and look at things happening on the ground. So that should be supported. And I saw a lot of great examples of that. Soil health experts are few and far between, particularly in Australia, Western Australia, and even in New Zealand. So they're highly treasured. We need programs to develop those skills in our agricultural industry. Long-term research. So here we have in the background photo there, the International Rice Research Institute. That trial has been going for decades. They've got a lot of great data. We need to be research and demonstrating our soil health research for a long time, because it takes time for us to understand the soil system and then to be able to see the impact of change. Decision support tools are obviously critical, but I guess I caveat that with it needs to be user-centred design. Think about the end user in designing those tools so that we can maximise their use and that investment. And also, I think we can do better with local, regional, statewide, national monitoring and evaluation of our soils. We need to make a commitment to that, and that is, again, another long-term commitment. So some recommendations that I developed based on my travels and my research was for Western Australia, quite specific, we need an online soil health knowledge hub. There's lots of those sorts of hubs seen globally, and I think WA growers could really benefit from that. The soil acidification obviously will be a critical topic. Soil health baselines need to be established, and they need to be monitored and evaluated in the longer term. We need to support long-term research, development, extension, and the validation of those in Western Australia, recognising that our farmers want peer-to-peer learning and they want to see it happening locally. So the West Australian Grower Group Network, I feel, plays a vital role, and they need to be appropriately resourced so that they can play their part in knowledge growth and supporting practice change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johanna. So that ends our 4 presentations. We have got a little bit of time now to do some question and answers. So I'll ask our panelists to turn their video on. And Tom, we have a couple of questions for you firstly. Are modern consumers willing to pay any extra for produce that is produced with animal welfare in mind?
Thanks, Jody. You might just have to let me turn my video back on.
Sorry,
Me
am I
too.
blocking you, Anna?
Yeah.
Sure. There you go.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for the question. So I think in general, there needs to be a minimum set of standards that we all keep to. And I think the second main point is it needs to be commercial. There's no point us producing a product where we're losing money, I guess. So that's the first point. But I think the best case scenario here is that the producer has a choice to pay for what fits in with their ethical standards. So whether that be a different variety of eggs or a different type of meat. But I do think there needs to be a minimum standard set, and then from there let the consumer choose. But again, there's no point doing it unless it's commercial.
Thanks, Tom. And while you're on the hot seat, another one, should processors in advanced nations take more responsibility for community education and bridging the gap between producer and consumer that you talked about?
Yeah, thanks for the question again. I don't think it's speaking out of school to say there's probably a level of discontent or a slight level of distrust in the beef supply chain, and that's probably the one I'm most familiar with, and that's from the producer to the processor, retailer through the consumer. There's some long-standing things in that process, and I think singling out any one point in that supply chain would probably be unfair, and I think it's a supply chain issue. So whether that's levy dollars or how we do that, but I think yeah, that's probably my solution there. That it's not on the processor only. I think the retailers and producers themselves need to work together to again share that common voice.
Thanks, Tom. Richard, we have a question about some things that might be helpful in soil health. Do you think that things like liquid fish or seaweed will retain a role in soil health, and should we be focusing on fully natural processes and ideals?
Yeah, thanks, Jody. The short answer is yeah, I think they do have a place. And I think, you know, we, again, understanding the fact that because we're taking nutrient out of our system, it's going to have to be put back somehow. Now, you know, a really robust, mature regenerative ag system potentially has the ability to deliver that with biology, but I think it takes a while to get there, and we need to be open to the fact that we're going to have to put some stuff back. What we need to probably look at doing is saying, okay, rather than doing soluble salt, fertilizer, or, you know, very highly intensive chemical, what other things can we use to perhaps bridge the gap? Now, in the wine industry, we're very fortunate We've probably got good access to compost. We're near city centres, mainly wineries, all of those things. So we're probably pretty good at it. But I think anything that will feed biology, and a bit like Johanna's saying, you know, it is a very unknown space. It's pretty exciting because if we get it right, that's the bit that could deliver some cost savings, obviously, to enterprise. Anything that enhances biological health and when we know feeds them, I think we need to be incorporating into the system somehow. So I think, yeah, all of those things will have some place, no question. Thanks,
Richard. I'm mindful of the time. We're just ticking over the hour. So one more quick question for you, Tom, from Adrian Marshall. Did you come across any programs in your travels to educate younger consumers so we can be starting to educate the consumer from a younger age? Specifically in welfare.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. Yeah, okay. No, thanks for the question. It's probably a better one directed, to be honest, at our Claire Feltzer there, who did study that topic. So I wasn't exactly looking at that. Probably where my focus was looking at the difference in that, again, back on that advanced versus emerging nations, and I saw a huge difference there. So it's probably not something I can answer with any confidence.
Thank you, Tom. Now, I'm just going to put into the chat a link now for the post-webinar survey. So please, you can cut and paste that link straight into your browser now and fill out that quick survey for us. Feedback's very important, but you will also receive a link to that on Monday. So if you don't have time now, if the evening's getting on, or you're rushing off to work if you're in the UK, please take the time to fill that in next week for us. So next week on Thursday, we'll be hearing from 4 more of our scholars who'll be speaking on climate change impacts, animal welfare, timber industry opportunities, and positive farming practices. And then the last week on 4th of March, we'll be looking at fresh produce packaging options. Try saying that fast. Alternative energy solutions, advancing the merino sheep, and improving cherry production. Next week's webinar will be hosted by Nigel Corish, who's a 2014 scholar from Queensland in Australia and currently the chair of Nuffield Queensland. So I won't be seeing you next week, so I don't have to worry about any tech issues that I might be having. So the world is changing very quickly, and I believe Nuffield offers agriculturalists developmental opportunities that equip us to deal with the fast changing and complex challenges that rigid thinking just doesn't cut it. We strive at Nuffield to be a positive and generous collaboration of people who value experiential and social learning. So thank you for tonight dialing in or zooming in to these presentations, because the fate of the world is in the hands of the people who turn up. So you turned up tonight to listen to our 4 presenters and took time out of your schedule and out of your free evening to invest in yourself by learning something that you didn't know. These 4 scholars took a leap of faith and invested in themselves and completed a Nuffield scholarship. So for that, I congratulate them, and I congratulate you all on your presentations tonight. And I hope to see you all next week and the week after for the last of our presentations. Thanks and good evening. Bye, everyone.